I never imagined betrayal could feel this calculated, this precise in its devastation. But here I stand, seeing the truth with eyes that can't unsee it. My name is Patrick Samuel, and I'm 32 years old. Each morning, I wake up in the house I paid for, make coffee in the kitchen where my wife Alyssa told me she was leaving for Colin, and remind myself that principles matter more than pain. The signs were there. Wine glasses in the sink, packed bags hidden upstairs, that missing spare key. My wife Alyssa had orchestrated every detail while I funded her graduate classes and our shared future. Even now I can feel the weight of those mortgage payments I made alone. I won't let their betrayal define me. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about justice. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. The afternoon sun streamed through our kitchen window, casting shadows across the granite countertop where I'd made countless meals. Alyssa stood with her arms crossed, designer purse already slung over her shoulder. The air between us crackled with an intensity I'd never felt before. "You're controlling, Patrick. Everything has to be your way on your timeline." Her voice dripped with rehearsed accusation. I noticed her perfectly styled hair, the careful application of makeup. She'd planned this moment down to the last detail. I kept my voice steady, even as my throat tightened. Controlling? That's rich coming from someone who wants Colin's lifestyle on my paycheck. The name felt bitter on my tongue. I won't fund my own replacement. Remember the smell of coffee going cold in your favorite mug? That's how betrayal hits. Familiar things turning sour right in front of you. "You'll keep paying," Alyssa smirked, twirling her car keys. "Because you're the good one. Always so responsible, so dependable, Patrick." She made it sound like a curse. My eyes drifted to the kitchen sink. 2 wine glasses, meticulously rinsed and placed upside down to dry. They hadn't been there this morning when I left for work. The reality of her premeditation hit me like a physical blow. "How long?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "Long enough." She glanced toward the front door. Colin's waiting outside. The suitcases by the stairs came into focus then. Expensive luggage I'd bought for our last anniversary trip. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I noticed the empty hook where our spare key usually hung, another piece of evidence that she'd orchestrated every detail of this exit. "I'm leaving," she announced, as if it were as simple as deciding what to have for dinner. "You can't stop me." The familiar warmth of our kitchen felt foreign now, tainted by the casual cruelty of her words. But I refused to let her see me crack. "Take your clothes," I said evenly, "not my piece." Her eyes narrowed at my composure, clearly expecting, maybe even hoping for, an emotional explosion. When none came, she grabbed her suitcase handle with unnecessary force. The door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed through my empty house. I stood at the window, watching red taillights fade into the gathering dusk. The silence pressed in, heavy with the weight of everything that had just shattered. My chest tightened as I pulled out my phone, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. There was only one person I could trust to help me navigate this mess. I pulled up Evan's contact and started typing, knowing that whatever came next, I'd need his clear-headed guidance to get through it. My hands barely trembled as I typed the message to Evan. She left. With someone else. Need your help. The kitchen felt too big now, filled with echoes of a life I thought I knew. His response came quickly. Document. Don't dramatize. Classic Evan. Cutting through emotion straight to action. Those 3 words steadied me more than any sympathy could have. I walked through the house, phone's camera ready, cataloging the evidence of Alyssa's calculated exit. The empty key hook caught my eye first. She'd taken the spare without asking, probably weeks ago. Her usual perfume lingered near the closet where her suitcases had waited, packed while I was at work. Each detail felt like another small betrayal. Remember those crime scene shows where investigators photograph everything? That's what it felt like, documenting the end of my marriage in megapixels and mental notes. I settled at the kitchen table, the one where we'd shared breakfast just this morning, and called the bank. The representative's voice was professionally sympathetic as I explained the situation. I need to freeze the discretionary credit card immediately, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. But keep the utilities and insurance active. Of course, sir. We'll set up alerts for all connected accounts. While we talked, I logged into our online banking. There it was, our joint checking account, my separate savings, the credit cards I'd always paid. I'd built this financial foundation brick by brick, believing it was for our future. What a joke that seemed now. My phone buzzed. Evan again. Found something. Check your email. The message loaded, showing a credit report I didn't recognize. There, buried in the fine print, was a store card opened 3 months ago. In my name. My stomach clenched. She forged my signature, I said when Evan picked up. The store card, I never authorized that. Already disputed, he replied. I've locked your credit with all 3 bureaus. No one's opening anything else in your name. For a moment, relief washed over me. At least I'd caught this before it got worse. At least I had proof of her deception. That feeling lasted exactly 27 minutes. The knock at my door was sharp, professional. A courier stood there, holding out a thick envelope with a law firm's logo embossed in the corner. Patrick Samuel, delivery from Hargrove and Associates. Inside, printed on expensive letterhead, was a threat dressed in legal language. Attorney Victor Hargrove demanded immediate restoration of all marital assets and threatened an emergency motion for both spousal support and seizure of funds. He called my account freezes financial abuse and promised court action within 48 hours if I didn't comply. I gripped the paper, feeling the heavy cotton stock crumple under my fingers. The words blurred together. Immediate relief, substantial penalties, emergency hearing. Just hours after Alyssa walked out, she'd already lawyered up with one of the most aggressive attorneys in town. The envelope contained one more item, a bright yellow sticky note in Alyssa's familiar handwriting. Should have kept paying. A. My chest tightened as I stared at that familiar loop in her Y. The same signature I'd seen on birthday cards and love notes, now attached to this declaration of war. The next morning hit like a hangover even though I hadn't touched a drink. Evan arrived at 7 sharp, carrying his laptop and a cardboard box filled with file folders. He didn't waste time with small talk, another reason we'd been friends since college. Show me everything, he said, clearing space on my dining room table. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting dust motes that danced over the polished wood. I remembered refinishing this table last summer, Alyssa bringing me lemonade while I worked. The memory tasted bitter now. I spread out the paper trail of betrayal, credit card statements, ATM receipts, hotel folios that made my jaw clench. Evan organized them with methodical precision, creating neat stacks by date. His fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, building a spreadsheet that turned raw data into damning evidence. Look at this pattern, he said, pointing to a cluster of Venmo transactions. Always to see, always on Friday afternoons. The amounts varied, $200 here, $350 there, but the rhythm was undeniable. My money flowing steadily into Colin's pocket through my wife's account. Here's the hotel charges, I added, sliding over a stack of folios. Different names each time, but same price point. Always paid with the card I covered. The timeline emerged like a connect-the-dots picture I wished I could unsee. 3 months of calculated deception. Each receipt, another small betrayal. Evan documented everything in his precise accountant's hand, building a case that would be impossible to deny. Later that evening, I met Alyssa at a coffee shop for the key exchange. My stomach churned at the sight of her sliding into the booth, wearing the blazer I'd bought her for her last birthday. She looked exactly the same, yet completely foreign. I didn't waste time. The manila envelope made a soft sound as I slid it across the table's scratched surface. These charges are marital waste, I said, keeping my voice level. Every hotel room, every Friday afternoon, Venmo to Colin. She leaned forward, eyes wide with practiced concern. The fluorescent lights caught the highlights in her hair, the ones I'd paid for last month, I realized with a fresh stab of anger. Patrick, please be decent about this, she said, her voice soft and reasonable. It was a separation. You're making it ugly when it doesn't have to be. A separation? My laugh felt like broken glass. That's what you call secret hotel rooms with another man while maxing out cards in my name? You're being cruel, she whispered. but I saw the calculation behind her hurt expression. "This isn't like you." "Decency means truth," I said, pushing back from the table. "Bill your boyfriend." Her eyes hardened into chips of ice. Without another word, she stood and stormed out, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the house key I'd come for. I made it to my truck before the walls came down. Parked in the far corner of the lot, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white and finally let the tears come. Not for her, she'd made her choice, but for the future I'd believed in. The Sunday morning pancakes we'd never make again. The children we'd talked about having. The lifetime of trust I'd invested in someone who saw it all as disposable. My sobs echoed against the windshield, unanswered in the growing dark. The courthouse loomed before me the next morning, its granite steps already warming in the early sun. I adjusted my tie, the blue one Dad had given me when I landed my first real job. Amazing how normal clothes can feel like armor when you need them to. Evan met me at the entrance, his briefcase bulging with organized evidence. "Remember," he said quietly as we cleared security, "let the numbers tell the story." Judge Whitaker's known for following paper trails. The courtroom wood paneling reminded me of long afternoons in my grandfather's study. That same rich oak smell that always meant serious business was at hand. I settled into the chair beside my attorney, forcing my breathing to stay even as Alyssa and Hargrove swept in like they owned the place. "Your Honor," Hargrove began, his voice dripping with manufactured concern, "Mrs. Samuel has been cut off from all financial resources by the defendant's unilateral actions." "Objection, Your Honor," my attorney interrupted. "Mischaracterization. Mr. Samuel maintained all household utilities and insurance. He simply secured his personal accounts." Judge Whitaker's silver eyebrows drew together as she studied the filing. "Mr. Hargrove, where is the emergency? I see no evidence of financial distress." "If I may," Hargrove tried again. "My client requires immediate access to marital assets." "Which she abandoned," I whispered to my attorney, who nodded and stood. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing Mrs. Samuel's systematic misuse of funds." He gestured to Evan, who approached with our timeline. "Mr. Chen, a certified public accountant, has prepared a detailed analysis." The judge examined our evidence with sharp eyes, occasionally glancing at Hargrove's increasingly uncomfortable expression. I watched Alyssa's face tighten as each page turned, revealing the truth in cold, hard numbers. "Mr. Hargrove," Judge Whitaker said finally, her tone sharp enough to slice paper, "this motion appears to lack merit. Your client has her own income, and these records show concerning patterns of spending on non-marital activities." She fixed him with a stern look. "I expect better supported motions in my courtroom. Consider this a warning about sanctions." Relief flooded through me as the judge denied their emergency freeze and ordered a full accounting. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. That feeling lasted exactly 6 minutes. I was heading down the courthouse steps, sunshine warm on my face, when a man in a cheap suit stepped directly into my path. "Patrick Samuel?" he asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "Yes? You've been served." He thrust an envelope at my chest and hurried away before I could respond. My hands tightened on the papers as I read, the words blurring together, then snapping into horrible focus. Pattern of coercive control, history of financial manipulation, emotionally abusive behavior. Evan, reading over my shoulder, swore softly. "They're trying to paint you as an abuser." I stared at the documents, my earlier victory turning to ash. The same tie that had felt like armor now seemed to be choking me. Alyssa and Hargrove emerged from the courthouse then, and I caught her satisfied smirk before they disappeared into a waiting car. My fingers crumpled the edges of the envelope. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were trying to destroy who I was. That night, my dining room became our war room. The same table where Alyssa and I had shared countless meals now held scattered papers and laptops casting blue shadows across the wood. Evan sat across from me, his fingers flying over his keyboard while I nursed a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "Look at this," Evan said, turning his screen toward me. "The bank alerts are showing a pattern. ATM withdrawals always after midnight, always from that convenience store on Palmer Street." I leaned forward, squinting at the timestamp data. That's nowhere near our house. Why would Alyssa go there? She didn't. Evan pulled up another window. I called the bank's fraud department, the cards linked to her phone for digital payments, but the security footage. He spun his laptop around completely. My throat went dry. There on the grainy feed was Colin, baseball cap pulled low but unmistakable, standing at the ATM. He was holding Alyssa's phone, using it to authorize the withdrawal. Every Thursday night for the past month, Evan said quietly, always when she was supposedly at late study groups. The familiar ache in my chest twisted into something sharper. I remembered all those Thursday nights I'd waited up, believing she was working toward our future. Instead, she'd handed her phone, and my money, to him. There's more, Evan continued, pulling up text messages the bank had flagged during their preliminary fraud investigation. These were attached to the digital payment records. My eyes locked onto the exchange between Alyssa and Colin. The timestamp showed 3 days ago, right after the failed emergency motion. Alyssa, don't worry about money. Get him to open the cash. Hargrove can scare him. Colin, better work. Running low. Alyssa, trust me. Patrick always gives in when pushed. I remembered that morning in the kitchen, how she'd smirked and called me the good one. The pieces clicked together with nauseating clarity. This wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated exploitation. Get me the binders, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Evan pulled 3 new binders from his briefcase, already labeled with tabs. We worked in focused silence, printing screenshots, organizing bank statements, creating timelines. Each piece of evidence went into its designated section: financial records, digital forensics, communication logs. The dining room clock ticked past midnight as we finished the last tab. My eyes burned from staring at screens, but a different kind of fire had kindled inside me. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about justice. I stood up to stretch, catching my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked worn, eyes red-rimmed from strain, but my jaw was set with determination. The glow of my laptop cast strange shadows across the room, making the neat stack of binders look almost luminous. They thought they could manipulate this, I said softly, more to myself than to Evan. They thought I'd just break. Evan closed his laptop with a decisive click. They miscalculated. I touched one of the binders, tracing the label with my finger. All their schemes laid bare in black and white. My whisper barely disturbed the quiet room. They won't win. The next morning, my footsteps echoed through the marble-floored lobby of Hargrove's law offices. My binders felt heavy against my side, but my stride stayed steady. I'd dressed carefully. Crisp blue button-down, dark jeans, work boots polished to a quiet shine. The receptionist directed me to conference room B with a practiced smile. Through the glass walls, I saw them before they saw me. Alyssa sat close to Colin, her head tilted toward him as she whispered something that made him nod. The sight of them together sent a familiar ache through my chest, but it didn't knock me off balance anymore. I remembered weekend mornings at our oak table, sharing coffee and dreams. Now those memories felt like photographs of someone else's life. Victor Hargrove stood as I entered, his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Samuel, you requested this meeting. I did. I set my binders on the polished conference table, noting how Alyssa's whispers cut off abruptly. The room smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. Before we begin, Hargrove started, but I was already opening the first binder. These are bank alerts from the past month. I laid out the printouts in a neat row. ATM withdrawals, all from the Palmer Street convenience store. Always after midnight. I watched Alyssa's face, saw the first flicker of uncertainty. Interesting location choice considering it's nowhere near your supposed study groups. Colin shifted in his chair, his cocky posture slipping. I pulled out the security camera stills next, spreading them across the table like playing cards. The timestamp on this one is particularly telling. I tapped one photo. Thursday night when you told me you were at the library. Instead, you gave Colin your phone linked to my accounts so he could make withdrawals. Alyssa's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't finished. The text messages came next, laid out in chronological order. Get him to open the cash. Hargrove can scare him. I read aloud. The words hung in the air like smoke. Patrick always gives in when pushed. I looked directly at Hargrove. That was sent right after your emergency motion failed. The attorney's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his expensive suit. He glanced at the evidence, then at his clients, his controlled fury visible in the whitening of his knuckles against the table's edge. You thought I'd break, I said, my voice steady. That I'd be so scared of looking cruel I'd just keep funding everything. But here's what I won't fund. Betrayal, lies, and whatever scheme you three cooked up to bleed me dry. Silence filled the room like water. Papers shuffled as Hargrove examined the bank records, his expression growing darker with each page. Alyssa stared at the table, her earlier confidence evaporating. Colin wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. I stood up, leaving the binders where they lay. Keep these copies, I have more. Alyssa's head snapped up, her glare trying to find purchase in my calm. I felt the corner of my mouth lift in a small, satisfied smirk. The look in her eyes told me she finally understood. I wasn't the same man she'd tried to manipulate in our kitchen. We'll see how the judge feels about this, Hargrove muttered. But the threat sounded hollow against the weight of evidence before him. 2 days later, I sat in the familiar courtroom, the polished wooden benches cool beneath my hands. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. My throat felt dry, but my posture remained straight, confident. Evan sat beside me, a quiet pillar of support. Judge Whitaker's silver hair caught the sunlight as he settled into his chair, arranging the files we'd submitted. The rustle of papers filled the tense silence. Across the aisle, Hargrove whispered urgently to Alyssa, who kept shooting worried glances my way. Colin was nowhere to be seen. Funny how quickly rats abandon a sinking ship. I've reviewed the evidence submitted, Judge Whitaker began, his voice carrying that perfect mix of authority and weariness. Mr. Hargrove, would you care to explain these text messages? Hargrove stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, those messages lack context. The context seems quite clear. Judge Whitaker held up one page. Get him to open the cash, Hargrove can scare him. That was sent shortly after my denial of your emergency motion. He peered over his reading glasses. Were you aware of this strategy when you filed? My heart quickened as Hargrove squirmed. I'd seen that same look on my nephew's face when caught raiding the cookie jar, guilt mixed with desperate calculation. Your Honor, my client was merely expressing frustration. Save it. Judge Whitaker's tone could have frozen summer. The evidence shows a clear pattern of attempted financial manipulation. The ATM withdrawals, the fraudulent credit card, and now these messages coordinating with a third party to access accounts you knew were individually funded by Mr. Samuel. I watched Alyssa's face drain of color. She'd always been so certain of her control, so convinced that her manipulations would work forever. The sight triggered a memory of our first apartment, how she'd promised we'd build everything together. The reality had been different. I'd built while she'd planned her exit. This court takes a dim view of using legal proceedings as a weapon. Judge Whitaker's words cut through my reflection. Mr. Hargrove, you're sanctioned for filing in bad faith. Mrs. Samuel, you are barred from accessing any joint reserves effective immediately. Alyssa's sharp intake of breath echoed in the quiet courtroom. Her hands began to shake as she clutched her stack of papers. Furthermore, the judge continued, any debt incurred during this period of separation will remain with the party who created it. He looked directly at Alyssa. The court will not compel Mr. Samuel to finance choices made to deliberately undermine the marriage. Relief flooded through me, clean and cool like mountain air. Not triumph. This wasn't about winning. This was about truth finally breaking through the surface, about justice arriving with quiet certainty. I stood slowly, gathering my documents. Across the aisle, Alyssa's lips trembled as she stared at the papers in her hands. The magnitude of consequences was finally hitting her. No more safety net, no more manipulation, no more using my earnings to fund her exit strategy. Without looking back, I turned and walked toward the courtroom doors. My footsteps sounded firm against the marble floor, each step carrying me closer to the exit and whatever waited beyond. Behind me, I heard Hargrove's muted cursing and Alyssa's shaky breathing, but those sounds belonged to a chapter that was closing. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, watching shadows stretch across the countertops where Alyssa had delivered her goodbye speech weeks ago. The house felt different now, not empty exactly, but stripped of pretense. The victory in court still hummed through my veins, but it wasn't the kind that made you want to celebrate. It was the quiet satisfaction of truth finally getting its moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan. Colin cleared out his gym locker. Left town according to Mike at the front desk. I set my coffee mug down, remembering all those charged receipts from that same gym. The membership Alyssa had insisted on paying for him, using our joint card. The irony might have made me laugh if it wasn't so predictable. The moment the judge cut off access to my accounts, Colin had vanished like morning dew under a harsh sun. Another message popped up, this time from my sister. Alyssa's roommate says she's crying about credit card bills. Guess reality finally showed up. I walked to my home office, each step echoing in the quiet house. The safe sat in the corner, solid and uncompromising. Inside were the files that had built my defense. Every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of evidence that proved what they'd tried to do. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, remembering how Alyssa used to mock my obsession with keeping records. Remember those summer cookouts when she'd roll her eyes at my filing system? "You're so boring with your little organized folders," she'd say, while secretly planning to use my stability against me. The smell of grilled burgers and fresh-cut grass still lingered in that memory, now tainted with the knowledge of her true intentions. The debt she'd racked up trying to establish her new life with Colin would be crushing, especially now that she'd have to handle it alone. No more emergency motions, no more threats from Hargrove, no more attempts to paint me as controlling just because I wouldn't fund their affair. The judge's words had been crystal clear. She'd chosen her path. Now she'd walk it without my wallet as a crutch. My gaze drifted to the front door, focusing on the deadbolt. The same lock she'd used when she came back for her things, the same one she still technically had a key to. In all the legal victories, I'd somehow overlooked this basic vulnerability. The deadbolt suddenly seemed less like a security measure and more like a reminder of unfinished business. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for the locksmith I'd used when we first bought the house. Another memory surfaced. Alyssa insisted on those fancy electronic keypads for the garage, but I'd wanted something simple and reliable for the main door. She'd claimed I was stuck in the past. Turns out sometimes the past has wisdom the future could use. The deadbolt stared back at me, a silent challenge. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I'd change it, along with every other lock in the house. Not out of fear or paranoia, but because some symbols of the old life needed to go before the new one could truly begin. Setting my phone down, I walked back to the kitchen and stood at the window. Somewhere across town, Alyssa was facing her first night of real consequences, while Colin was probably crossing state lines, putting distance between himself and the mess he'd helped create. And here I was, in the home I'd protected, surrounded by the quiet strength of evidence and truth. Morning light streamed through the windows as I laid out my tools on the front porch. The old deadbolt had served its purpose, but like so many things from my past life, it was time for an upgrade. I'd chosen a heavy-duty Schlage. Simple, reliable, exactly what I needed. No electronic keypads or wireless connections, just solid brass and steel. The screwdriver felt right in my hand as I removed the old lock. Each turn of the screws was deliberate, methodical. You ever notice how focusing on precise movements can quiet your mind? The metal components came apart smoothly, revealing the inner mechanism that had guarded my home through years of false security. "Need any help?" My neighbor Dave called from his driveway. He'd been walking on eggshells since Alyssa left, like everyone else who'd witnessed our collapse. "All good," I replied, holding up the new deadbolt. "Just making some improvements." The installation went quickly. I'd always been good with my hands. The satisfying click of the new lock sliding home echoed something deeper inside me. I tested the key, watching the bolt move in and out with pristine precision. No more spare keys floating around. No more wondering who might have access. This was mine now, truly mine. Next came the porch light. I'd noticed it flickering the other night, casting uncertain shadows across the entrance. That wouldn't do anymore. Standing on the ladder, I stripped the old wires and replaced them with fresh copper, making clean connections that would hold steady for years. When I flipped the switch, The light blazed clear and strong, pushing back the darkness without hesitation. Inside, I ran my hand across the oak dining table, the one I'd refinished during those first weeks after Alyssa left. Remember how therapeutic sanding can be? Each stroke had stripped away another layer of past, revealing the solid grain beneath. Now it gleamed with a depth that only comes from patient work and honest materials. I pulled out one chair, my chair, and set a single place setting. The white plate centered perfectly, silverware aligned with quiet precision. No wineglass needed. I'd developed a taste for clarity. This was what victory looked like. Not a celebration, but a return to fundamentals. Somewhere across town, Alyssa was probably staring at her mounting bills, realizing that Colin's promises had evaporated along with access to my accounts. Hargrove's sanctions would sting his professional reputation, but I hadn't done that. His own actions had. That's what they all had to learn. Consequences aren't punishment, they're just truth with timing. Standing in my doorway, I watched the porch light gain strength as dusk settled in. Its beam cut clean lines across the welcome mat. The new one I'd chosen, simple and unadorned. No cute sayings, no decorative flourishes, just solid function, like everything else I'd rebuilt. I inserted my key into the new lock, listening to the smooth mechanism engage. The sound carried the weight of earned wisdom, of battles won not through volume but through steady resolve. Looking out at the gathering dark, I smiled slightly. Justice isn't loud, I said to the quiet air. It lasts. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.